Welcome to the Growth Bridge. I'm your host, Ivo-Castillo, here in Miami, and this podcast is for entrepreneurs and leaders with strong ties in Latin America who want to understand how Anglo founders think about growth, leadership, marketing, and decision making, and how to apply their mindset in your own business. Today, I'm excited to have Michael Burrows. He's the founder of Sheer Velocity. Hello, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing fine, Ivo. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for your time today. Let's start, right?
Okay, sure. I'm ready.
Michael, tell us a little bit about your background and how do you get into helping companies accelerate growth?
Okay. Well, after college, I went into the Army as an officer, U.S. Army. I was in the medical service corps, so I spent my first 12 years as an adult leading medical companies and being a staff, not corporations, but Army companies, and attending schools and even teaching schools in the Army. And my last assignment was the head of leadership and ethics and communication at the U.S. Army Academy of Health Sciences. And I got very interested in leadership development and coaching and all of that stuff while I had 260 captains and majors in my classes who were mid-career officers. And I left the military and joined the private sector. My first job out of the Army was as a director in a Fortune 200 company that was in healthcare automation. Spent 9 years in healthcare IT. And I was the director of organization development for that company. Part of my job was training the staff, the 200 and some odd employees we had, plus coaching the executives in the company. I liked that. I moved on to another Fortune 200 company, did the same thing, and another one and did the same things. I've had quite a few years in the organization development field and quite a few years developing executives. And then I left and became an executive recruiter. Left the corporate world and became an executive recruiter for a top 5 global executive search firm. And I did work all over the world. And I ended up becoming a managing director for the regional office of that firm. I spent 12 years doing that. At the same time, I was also doing executive coaching, which I liked doing back in the corporate days. And I just continued to do it through my search career, executive search career. And then I quit being a recruiter for a while and did nothing but executive coaching. Now, along the way, Ivo, I had to develop a process for integrating new leaders into their jobs because we had a lot of turnover in one of the companies that I worked for, executive turnover, and it was devastating to the business. You know, for these people to come in 6 months, 9 months later, in our case, they were off, and I had to fix that, and I did. And I developed a process that started before the start date of these new leaders, and I implemented it throughout our company and turned that problem around. Then when I became an executive recruiter years later, I wasn't doing that anymore, but I had a client, an executive recruiting client who wanted me to recruit a chief operating officer for their organization, but said I'd talked to her about this process over lunch. And she said, I want you to do that process in conjunction with the search to hire this chief operating officer. Would you do that? I said, well, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And now I created a whole new service in executive recruiting. I'm thinking, well, this is perfect match to do the executive recruiting project. And as soon as that person gets hired, integrate them into the organization and everybody wins. Shortly after I started doing that, someone said, you ought to write a book about that and get this word out, and which I did. And in 2011, I published the book Before Onboarding, How to Integrate New Leaders for Quick and Sustained Results. It's held a 5-star rating on Amazon ever since it came out. It's gotten me a lot of business and a lot of notoriety. I'm kind of known now around the world as a guru of sorts in that field of integrating new leaders into organizations. And I'm a public speaker on that topic. And I rejoined an executive search firm called Sheer Velocity. You introduced me. I'm not the founder of it. I'm a senior partner in that organization. And I'm the practice leader in that organization for new leader integration. And that's what we do at Sheer Velocity. We're a global but boutique executive search firm, and we incorporate new leader integration process at the tail end of the searches we do. And I am all about talking about that, Ivo, podcasts, public speaking, because I believe very strongly that it makes a huge difference in the success of the executive, but more so the organizations who use that process.
That's great. And what inspired you to be part of the Sheer Velocity? How did you
Okay,
come to
yeah.
the
Well,
idea?
I'll tell you. The founder of Sheer Velocity worked with me at this other firm, this very large search firm, and he and another individual left and started their own search firm. They're out in Denver, Colorado. I'm here in St. Louis, and they asked me to come with them. Yeah, I mean, why don't you join us and we'll really focus on new leader integration, and I did. That's how I got to Sheer Velocity, and they are very committed to me in this process and to our clients by doing that. And I'm still a very active executive coach. I do that all the time.
And that you mentioned that when companies come to you for help, what is actually the main problem they are trying to solve?
Well, they're coming at me from two directions. If they're coming at me to fill an opening,
Yeah.
but their problem is they either just lost a very good executive who took another job,
Yeah.
and went on
They
to
lost.
bigger and better things, and now they've got to fill that position, or they are replacing someone that hasn't worked out. And often that's the case. Often that's the case. And so they come to me and people like me. Executive recruiters are all over the world. I mean, search firms are everywhere, retained executive search. And I have to develop the business. I have to convince the client that I'm the person that should do that work for them. It's a highly relational business. And once they trust me to do the project, I fill these openings with executive talent. And that's one thing they come to me for. The other thing they come to me for is they've got executives that need to be moved into a higher level position or to be made better in the positions that they're in. And they bring me in to coach them to become an executive coach. And usually what I'm doing in that area is I'm making them more balanced between leaders and managers. I don't know if you've observed this or not, but I can tell you when I was an Army officer teaching leadership, the military is all about leadership. It's all
Yeah.
about influencing people. You've seen enough war movies to know it's all about leaders, And we had four principles about leadership. A leader is a teacher, a counselor, a coach, and a manager. And so three of those principles are influencing, teaching, counseling, and coaching. And big part of the job was managing. I was a company commander twice when I was in the Army, and that all of those things applied to me every day in my job. When I entered the private sector, I found out that wasn't the case in the private sector. It was a big surprise to me. It's about 85% management, and management is controlling resources. People are not resources. People are people, although they treat them like resources often. You influence people, and communication is the medium for leadership. Leadership is an influencing process. And so, what I have found after coaching a couple of hundred executives in my career, at least, and developing hundreds more in leadership development programs, is that in the private sector, it's heavily leaning towards controlling. Management's a controlling process. If they go to graduate school and get a master's in business administration, it's almost all management. They don't get much leadership training in that, if at all. And I actually spent 2 years as an adjunct professor in an MBA program. And I taught small business management, which I'm a business coach and I'm pretty good at that. And I also taught leadership. I taught the only leadership course in that program. And it was an elective. The students who got their MBAs were not even required to take my course.
Okay.
And so all that did was just reinforce my belief that I had established long before, is that business schools crank out managers and the military cranks out leaders. And sometimes there's a crossover, and you find a military person in the private sector who brings some of that leadership with them. I was a classic example of that. And then some people are just natural leaders. As they were growing up, they just found themselves being in leadership roles. They had the right values and attitudes to be a leader. And then they just, in the military, we then trained them how to operationalize those values. But in the private sector, it's not there. So, no, not there nearly as much. And so as an executive coach, they bring me in to shore up the leadership gap. We need somebody who's going to pull all these people together and take them to greater heights. Well, that's a leader. If they bring that kind of person in, it's a leader. And often the people they need to move up into those roles don't have those influencing skills. And so they bring me in to round them out,
Yeah.
make them more balanced.
Yeah. And from I hear from you, being executive, top level executive, is all we have to do with leadership more than skills or knowledge about the actually work?
Well, years ago, there was a book written back when I was in my formation years called The Peter Principle. It's long since
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
shelved.
Oh, yeah.
You may have heard of
Very
that book.
good. Yeah.
And in The Peter Principle, the Peter Principle was that we all are at risk of getting promoted to our level of incompetence.
Yes.
Okay. And it was as though that's not necessarily a bad thing, because what's happened is you've moved up about as high as you're going to go because you've reached your level of incompetence. Well, I would venture and have said this many times. It's not a good thing that you've plateaued, for one, and you're also incompetent. When you reach that level, you're now managing your
That's
organization as an incompetent person.
correct.
So it can be very problematic when people get into that situation. Organizations don't always realize that there's a leadership gap because they're collectively trained to be managers. And that's how, I mean, heck, I was a corporate executive in 3 Fortune 200 companies. I know how we think in that group. I just happen to be the only person with a strong leadership background. And, it's all about managing, controlling resources. And people, unfortunately, and I've seen it happen way too many times, people are unfortunately the first to go when they're trying to make their organizations more efficient, cut down the labor costs. And if people on the other end see themselves as just round pegs in round holes being moved around like chess pieces, there's no loyalty that they have to their people that run the company. There's no loyalty that they have to the company, because long ago companies stopped being loyal to their employees. And so there's like this, almost like a divide between the people that get the work done and the people that run the company. And I've been in many an executive committee meeting when the talk of laying off 10 or 15% of the workforce was just looked at as just a way for us to, make our numbers this year so we all get our bonuses. And I mean, I had a really difficult time with that, I always had a difficult time with that in the corporate world. I didn't always work in companies that did that, but when I encountered it, it just really riled me to do that. So when I became a coach and a recruiter and all that, I just said, well, now I'm kind of working for myself, and I'll change that. I call myself, Ivo, an evangelist for new leader integration. I mean, I'm like a preacher. Put me in front of a large group, and I'll tell them why they need to do this. Ivo, 30 to 50% of senior outside hires fail. They fail, and they fail within 18 months typically. And that research goes back 30 years. That's a horrendous casualty rate for
And
people at the top,
why is that? Because
because
they
they're
don't
not
look for leaders?
they're not integrated. It's generally not because they picked the wrong people. When I do an executive recruiting project, we'll start with roughly 100 potential candidates, and then we narrow it down to 10. And then when it gets to be 10, when I get involved in a very stringent way, and I'm really evaluating these people, and I get them down to 5. And when I'm satisfied with those 5, then and only then do I go to my client and say, here are 5 people that can fill that position that I'm recruiting for you. Any one of them can do the job. Now it's your job to pick the one that you think best fits within your culture or whatever it is that they're looking for. And so it's not the selection process. If they're using an executive search firm like ours, they generally get good candidates. The problem is that when they bring them in at that level, that the attitude is a sink or swim attitude. They bring that person in and they say, well, look at their background. Look at what they've accomplished before we hired that person. Just turn them loose and let them do what we hired them to do. Well, that's not a good thing. So there was a professor at Harvard named Michael Watkins who wrote a book years ago called The First 90 Days. And in that, he said what happens in the first 90 days will determine whether that person's still around in 18 months. So my process in my book Before Onboarding is all about those first 90 days. But unlike other books that are basically you show up for work and you read the book and you try to do these things while you're drinking from a fire hose, learning your job, I do it all before they get there. My process is a consultant-driven process with people like me. It doesn't have to be me. All you got to do is read my book. It's a how-to book. Any coach out there of my caliber can do that process. And then I basically interview the boss and all the peers and all the direct reports of this new executive. I ask them a lot of questions, all of which are in the book. Some of them are overlapping. And it's all focused on the first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. What must they do? What must they avoid doing at all costs? Where are the cultural landmines that could trip them up? What are the personality issues they're going to have to deal with? I cover everything. And I develop what I call a blueprint for success. Format is in the book. And I meet with the new leader who still isn't working yet, not into the job yet. And we go over that document line by line and page by page. And I basically tell them, I know more about your job than anybody right now because I've talked to everybody about your job. So you need to listen to me at least for the next 90 days because it's all focused on your success. These are the things that you have to do, as I heard from your boss and your peers and everybody that works for you. And my main objective is in making them come in as leaders, is their people have to trust them. The peers have to trust them, and their direct reports have to trust them. And they don't typically trust new people coming in. They don't know. They knew the previous person in that job, but the new person's coming in to say, can I be honest with that person? Will that person be honest with me? And there's all this dance going on. Well, nobody has time for that. The break-even point for a new executive to start returning value in the organization is 6.2 months. Who has a half a year to wait for a new leader coming in to be returning value? They want that yesterday. They want it immediately. You can't have it immediately. But my process compresses 6.2 months down to maybe 4 to 6 weeks when they're really up and running. The morning of the first day that this new leader is on the job, I host a meeting with their team. And in the course of my interviewing the team, I said, I want one question from each of you. It's an anonymous question, and it's, what do you want to know? What do you want the new leader to answer in a public forum in front of you and all of your peers, and they'll never know you asked the question. And so they give me a question. It's a secret question. I get the question, no names attached to them. And when I have that meeting going over the blueprint, I give that new leader the questions. I'm saying at 9:00 in the morning on your first day, you're going to stand in front of your entire team, and here are the questions you're going to answer. So let's look at them, because you've got to give truthful, authentic answers to those questions. They've got to look at you, and in a short amount of time, they got to say, can I trust this person? Is that individual shooting straight with us or not? And I said, by lunchtime, if they're not trusting you and communicating openly with you, then it's going to take you weeks, if not months at best, to get halfway where you need to be. I mean, that trust issue is very, very important. And I have a process the first day to get them through it. And they almost always do. We prepare for those questions. I say, better be an honest answer. It'll be a very honest answer. And you can see the body language change in the meetings. I mean, when first the new leader comes in and all the people are there and they're all, self-contained, and then the new leader starts answering these questions. And after 30 minutes or so, they kind of lighten up and they say, wow, that was a tough question. I kind of like the way he or she answered that question. Yeah, that's tough. I wouldn't have wanted to answer that question. I like the way they did it. I think I can trust this person, And you could see the body language change in the room. And an hour and a half into that meeting, we break for cake and donuts and coffee. And then they come back and they've identified the new leader. We do it together in my meeting. They've identified a half a dozen key issues that the team said this person needs to work on immediately. And then he can or she can sit around a table and say, well, tell me about these things. Yeah, here's a big problem you're having. I learned, Michael told me in the process that it's an issue. Tell me about it. Well, now they'll talk to that person. After the first hour and a half, of that individual establishing trust, now they feel like, okay, well, what do you want to know, boss?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll be over with you because now I'm kind of trusting you, Well, if communication is the medium for leadership and you're not communicating, you're not going to be a leader. And if you are communicating, you get a lot more done. And that's the key part of my process is that I love the most about it. It's that morning meeting of the first day.
And there's a question. When a company wants to increase this leadership executive and understand that is one of the core values of the organization, what do they should be the focus to do so?
Well, a lot of companies, it's very fashionable to come up with a mission statement, You may have
Yeah.
experienced this. And then underneath that are the principles under which we operate at Acme Widget Corporation, and they post them on the bulletin board, and they're all
Correct.
well and good. Well, that's often, I unfortunately have seen just an exercise that the companies go through, and then they put it on a bulletin board and they never talk about it ever again. But if you've got a leader running that organization, then leadership can pass down. If you've got a person who is an overdone strength manager running that organization, then a lot of times those principles really are not internalized. And so it really is incumbent upon a top down process originated by leaders and pushed down and reinforced positively and negatively by leaders. You got to reward the people that do those principles, and you got to punish the people that don't. And when a word gets around in an organization that we really mean this, whatever that principle happens to be, it's usually a leadership oriented type of principle, values based, authenticity based, and people aren't living that up. It's incumbent upon the president or CEO, assuming that person drove it down and is a leader, to call people on the carpet over there or to single them out and reward them because they're a great example. I think that works better than the punishment, but you got to balance that. You got to hear the people that are doing it. I want to reinforce that. Here are the people that are not. I'm going to talk to you privately about it. I expect changes to be made. If you're going to stick around here because we mean this stuff. And so, really, unfortunately or fortunately, it's a top-down driven process to get to the point you asked me about.
And I'm curious about what do you think to use technology, example AI, in this leadership environment?
I have been asked that question on all the other podcasts that I've been doing because,
Yeah,
frankly,
because
a lot of the podcasters are in the AI world, and I'm a leadership person or
yeah,
primarily. And so they asked me, similar questions, and it's a good, very good question. And if organizations tend to be heavily management driven, their formal education is management. Their way they operate is controlling, controlling, controlling. Management is using efficiency and is accomplishing goals efficiently and effectively. That's that's basically the mission of management. And efficiency is one of the main drivers and effectiveness of AI. So if you've got a shortage of leadership in the organization, I'm seeing, and I'm actually trying to work to minimize this, that organizations take AI, which is a management tool. It's not a leadership tool. It's a management tool. And what happens is the gap gets wider. When they fall in love with everything AI can do to them, for them, which then all of a sudden the people become even more of an afterthought. Well, yeah, we're going to have to sacrifice some people around here because we got to get really efficient and get things done yesterday. But really, their motivation is shareholder value and their bonuses. I mean, that's really what drives top managers and executives in organizations to make decisions. Quality of the product, shareholder value, and the money they make.
yeah.
So I really see AI being detrimental to leadership initiatives in organizations. And one of the things I'm also offering up to people is if you're about to implement AI in your organization, let me come in and be an advisor to you as to how to make sure leadership doesn't go away
Yeah.
because you're implementing this terrific management tool, which is here to stay, whether we like it or not. AI is just going to get more and more and more and more and more. But leadership is really at risk the more people fall in love with AI in an organization. That's what I'm experiencing, and that's how I really feel about it. I use AI. I mean, it's made my job a whole lot easier, and and I'm more effective, and so I guess clearly see the benefits. Well, the people that are being affected by AI often lose their jobs. I mean, they went to college, let's say, to learn how to do a particular skill, and now all of a sudden that skill's no longer needed. Now, well, what do I do now? I mean, I've spent 10 years doing this work, and now I don't have a career field anymore. Well, you got to really manage that. I mean, if you care about people, or if you're an organization that truly believes the people that work for you are going to make or break you, and they are the most valuable resource you have, then you got to take all that into consideration. And they're not right now. They're not. And I would like to make a dent in that problem.
This is one very great insight you just gave me. because in my other interviews, they don't see it that way. And I like your perspective about being a management tool, a leadership tool. And you have to be a good leader to that don't take away.
Yeah. You have to
Uh,
be a good leader to effectively implement
use-
AI so that it has a minimum negative impact on the people in the organization and a maximum positive impact on the people in the organization. And
right.
that, sir, is leadership, because it's value based. That's all internal. I mean, people that are going to lead their organization that way, that's inside of them. They just believe that.
And the people, to be honest,
Yeah.
in all my 22 interviews, what I see is that people are scared about AI.
Yeah. Well,
Whether you use it as an owner, whether you are a leader, where is it, people are scared because you don't know if you're gonna have job next year.
yeah.
You're gonna have clients next year
Yeah.
because of AI.
Yeah. It's a great thing. I mean, it's enough to make you smile if you see the upside, but there is definitely downside, on the people, the impact
And
on the people and doing it.
yeah, and you know how is people and how is the human behavior. We
Sure.
tend to see more the downside
Yeah.
than the good sides.
Yeah.
As a
Yeah.
human beings,
Mhm.
tend to the most of us.
Well,
The general,
let me tell you when you really see the downside. It's when they walk you to the door and you've cleaned out your desk and you no longer have a job anymore. And you have a spouse and two kids, a mortgage and two car payments, and you're trying to save for college funds for your kids. And all of a sudden you lost a very good job because AI put you out of business. And I mean, that's real. That's real pain. I mean, as an Army officer, I understand that I got to get the mission accomplished, but I have to make sure my people are cared for along the way. Get it done with the minimum amount of casualties. That's really the goal of any military leader out there. Can we take the hill and nobody get hurt? That's the perfect battle. Well, I think business is that way too. It's just a different kind of battle. Nobody's firing bullets. But there are other ways to hurt people, really hurt people. And often those people are your own people. So you got to take all that into consideration. That really requires a proper mindset on the part of the people at the top that are implementing these great tools. And so that the negative impact on the people that work for you is minimal.
correct.
And that takes commitment to do that.
And what advice would you give a founder that feels stuck?
Stuck in the scalability of their organization.
Yeah, and stuck in any way.
Okay.
As your experience, the more things that you have seen.
I have an answer for you because they all get there. All those founders reach a point. I mean, kind of, I won't say they're incompetent, but kind of they've reached that level where I don't know what to do anymore. In your words, I'm stuck. Get an executive coach. You're finished with school, usually. You've learned all the management principles there are to learn. You're at the top. You can't really rely on the people below you to be confidential and to be able to really, air out your issues with that person. Bring a person like me in, for a good year, and we sit down periodically and we go through these things, and I'm your sounding board. I'm the person that helps you get unstuck. A good executive coach can put you through that process. You don't need to go back to school anymore, and you don't need to lie awake at night staring at the ceiling afraid. Get a good executive coach. And if you don't click with that person, get another one, because that's your partner. That person's kind of your mentor in a way to get you unstuck. That's my best advice I can give a founder like that.
And that gives me to, what is your mindset?
What is my mindset? Well, I think I said earlier, I'm an evangelist for new leader integration. I think that the solution to most organizations' problems is to solve this problem of top leaders failing. Get the right people in, first of all, and integrate them into the job so that everybody, from the very first day, they're getting maximum benefit. You're getting maximum benefit from that hire. Everybody that works for that person is getting maximum benefit. And the only way that's going to happen is if you bring somebody in like me, not just me. I only have so much bandwidth to integrate that person and start before they show up and make that a policy throughout your organization so that every new leader coming in, everyone gets integrated. No exceptions. And if they do that, that's what I'm all about. That's why I'm on your podcast. I mean, I got a lot of things that I do and I do well, but that's where my passion is, because I've seen it. I've developed the process. I'm known around the world for having developed that process. Not nearly enough people do it. And I'm determined in the remaining years I have working that I'm going to get that process out there. That's what I'm about.
And if you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what it would be?
Never think that you have arrived in the course of your development. You need to constantly be developing. I'm 75 years old. I'm still learning. I will never stop learning. You know, I've never had this attitude that, well, I know it. I know everything I need to know. Just put me in any job and I'll just bring what I know. Now, there's a philosopher I love. His name's Heraclitus. And he said, everything's in a state of flux. Everything's always changing. That was his principle. And he called it becoming. We're always becoming. We've never arrived. And he said, you can't put your foot into the same river twice. That was the thing for which he's known. And think about it. You know, river's always moving. You put your foot in the water, well, it's still the river, but the water's different. The water has passed you by. Now it's new water. And I coach as an executive coach. I've run into many executives who think, well, what do I need to know? No, well, I got all kinds of ways to point that out to you, what you need to do. But if you don't have the value that you need to develop, you know, what good is the coaching? And that's the one thing I would tell any new young person going in there. You have a lot to learn in the job you're in. You'll have a lot to learn to get you ready for the next job, and a lot to learn when you're in the next job. And just keep that mindset going till you're right to the very top. You end up being the CEO of 100,000 people, $1 billion company. You better be becoming and not think that you have arrived. And that's my mission.
That is a great, great question. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. People, I hope you like it. See you next time.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Michael.